The final piece of content added in the She Sells Seashells update is the almighty Crab King boss, who happens to be Pearl's ex-lover. Being the romantic experts that they are, the survivors decide that the best course of action is to murder Pearl's ex. You know, like the reasonable decision makers that they are. If you haven't seen my previous video about the rest of the content in the Seashells update, check it out now to get up to scratch on everything else seashell related. The Crab King has quickly become what's probably my least favourite fight in Don't Starve. It combines many cheap stuns and spammy attacks, and is overall much of a drag to fight. Seeing as my thoughts on the boss, which is the main focus of the video, obviously require context, I will briefly go over the Crab King and what he's all about. This video was originally going to cover everything to do with the Crab King, from his stats to strats, but it definitely would have been at least 20 minutes, and let's face it, virtually everyone knows what the Crab King's all about at this point in time. So instead, I've decided to trim some fat and narrow the video down to simply explaining the Crab King at a surface level, and discussing about why I feel it's easily the worst boss in DST. The Crab King is an ocean boss who must be socketed with 9 different gems in order to start the fight. Each different gem will buff him in a different way. Pearl's Pearl can be inserted as well, giving a massive +3 to all possible gem buffs. Defeating this boss with the Pearl inserted will also make him drop an additional item. Before you even think about fighting the Crab King, you'll have to first locate it. This is the most time-consuming part of the boss fight, as the inactive Crab King structure can spawn anywhere in a medium deep ocean, circled by an eerie ring of sea stacks. Finding him is 100% luck. It can take you a very, very long time sailing around to locate it. Of course, changing to Woody and using the goose form can speed this up a bit, so keep that in mind if you plan on fighting it. This part of the fight, well, it isn't even really part of the fight, and already this boss is beginning to highlight a lot of issues. The Crab King's 100% random location has really emphasized how boring the current ocean mechanics are. It just takes so much of this to find the bastard. Like really, I could be doing anything else right now. I could go for a walk, get some fresh air, watch some YouTube, jack off, I don't know, just not this for literal hours. Clay could easily fix this by making the Pearl reveal the boss on the map, sort of how like a socketed moon lens works, just to get rid of this horrible, dauntingly monotonous task. The Crab King has a number of dastardly attacks up his sleeves, each deadlier than the last. Interestingly, none of his attacks directly target players. Instead, all but one of them are designed to hinder boatcraft in some way. Attack number 1 is summoning a number of geysers under each boat in his vicinity, each geyser damaging the boats and spawning a small leak. Attack number 2 involves the casting of a spell that decreases every player's temperature and then results in a 10-second freeze stun that can only be avoided via wonky positioning or through the use of a dwarf star. Getting caught in this attack will usually result in the fight going south, as the king can recast the freeze AoE and stunlock you forever. Get it? South? Because it's cold. Alright, moving on. Periodically, the boss will summon a number of imposing claws. These claws will slowly move towards the player's boat and then clamp on the side, dealing massive amounts of damage initially, and lesser but still dangerously high amounts periodically. Finally, the Crab King will occasionally try to heal itself by repairing its crown with rocks. These rocks heal large amounts of health, and can be destroyed by attacking the Crab King a number of times during the animation. This attack casts very quickly, and it's highly important to take care of it before the boss heals too much health. You may have noticed how there weren't many exact details given in that last segment, lots of a number or an amount. That's because the Crab King has a unique mechanic wherein the gems slotted into him at the start determine the stats of his attacks. Each gem has a unique effect. Pearl's Pearl counts as 3 of each, and the Iridescent gem counts as 1 of each, although there's no point to inserting the latter lest you want to seek a challenge. The exact values of each gem will be up on the screen, courtesy of the wiki, in case you want to read up on what each gem does exactly. In short, red gems buff the Crab King's maximum health. Especially when fighting with the Pearl, these are not very favourable to insert, as the King's health mounts rapidly. Purple gems affect the amount of geysers spawned per boat during said attack. This gem type is generally pretty good to add, as many strategies aim to cancel this attack as much as possible. Blue gems are the most volatile gem to insert, as they buff 3 individual stats, more than any other gem. 2 out of 3 of these buff his already bullshit freeze attack by increasing the range and temperature decrease. Blue gems also increase the number of hits it takes to freeze him, which is coincidentally one of the main strategies to defeat the boss. Do not insert blue gems, there is no reason to, unless you're a sadomasochist or something. Yellow gems buff the boss's freeze attack and geyser attack casting time, each insert reducing the telegraph animation time, that is, either the bubbling waters or the falling snow. Orange gems buff the King's healing attack, each one upping his healing per rock, and also sometimes the amount of hits the King must take before each heal is cancelled. And finally, green gems change the amount of, and health of, imposing claws that appear during the fight. Although the focus of this video is not how to defeat the Crab King, for context, I'll briefly go over the main strategy for defeating this boss. 2 words: freeze cheese. If you want to have even a sliver of a chance at beating the Crab King without expanding massive amounts of wooden stingers in the production of boat patches, you're essentially required to cancel his geyser attack with an ice staff. His other attacks can be handled via other means, although if he decides to combine 2 attacks, such as his self-heal and imposing claw summon, freezing is also advised, so the situation can be dealt with in a timely fashion. A normal fight, without cheese methods that is pretty much guaranteed to be a massive resource sink, as should you run out of ice staves or boat patches mid-fight, you're as good as dead. All in all, the fight is a massive slog. There's a lot of cancelling and repairing, and it doesn't feel very rewarding to complete. But what about loot? Killing King Crustacean takes a lot of time and resources, so what do you get in return? The Crab King drops 7 meat, a large number of shell bells, a blueprint for a new weapon, and a new altar called the Celestial Tribute if defeated with Pearl's Pearl inserted. The tribute will spawn underwater like the junk piles around Pearl's house, and must be lifted up with the cum. The weapon crafted from the blueprint is the Strident Trident, a gnarly armament that can be used to make Crab King style geysers spawn in the ocean under the player's cursor. This can be used to mine rocks and salt formations, and also unreliably catch fish. The Celestial Tribute, the King's other drop, and also the main reward for beating him with the Pearl, currently does nothing, although it does function as a Celestial Altar if inserted into a Celestial Fissure. This item will almost certainly get a future use, similarly to how the Shadow Atrium acted when it was first added into the game. All evidence points towards it getting a pretty important purpose, as the Shadow Atrium currently leads to the Fuel Weaver fight, not to mention many of the character quotes for the tribute when inserted into a fissure say that something is missing, or other expository blabber. If you haven't followed me on Twitch, go and do so if you want. I'm streaming pretty much every day at 12 or 1 PM UTC time. I'm gonna keep this plug pretty short because this video is already really long, so yeah, go and do that if you want. The main gripe with the Seashells update overall is the Crab King, whom I've started to dislike a fair bit. The concept is really great. The idea of building your own boss fight and choosing which aspects of it to buff is very clever, and it rewards creativity with different strategies. There is definitely potential for the Crab King to be a great fight, but as it stands, it isn't very fun nor rewarding to take on. To begin, any boss in any game that can indefinitely stun you is not a good boss. Full stop. Seriously, it feels like the game is rubbing your mistake in your face if this happens. The way this boss is made means that even one tiny slip up, such as failing to exit the freeze range or enter the radius of your Dwarf Star, can result in instant death because of how often the King spams this godforsaken attack over and over again. I'm never a fan of stun mechanics in boss fights like this, but an indefinite stun, it honestly feels like a piss take. My next main gripe with the boss is how the only way to defeat it without bringing a ridiculous amount of boat patches is to constantly cancel its attacks with an ice staff. Not only does this make the fight a massive resource sink, it means fighting it just feels like you're cheesing it to death, when in reality it's almost the only way. If the boss wasn't immune to sleep, this problem would be somewhat rectified, but it would still be very much of a slog. This also prevents winning the fight from feeling like a triumph or victory and more of a relief. Most boss fights in Don't Starve definitely suffer from this problem to a degree, but to me it feels especially magnified with the Crab King. Another issue is that the majority of the boss's attacks all feel very spammy and repetitive. Each of them is very significant in that it can instantly kill you, and the fact that he always performs them one after another makes the fight overly intense and very stressful. Let's look at the Fuel Weaver, probably one of the coolest and best designed fights in the Don't Starve franchise. The ancient Fuel Weaver has a large number of dastardly attacks that are highly powerful, such as making himself invulnerable and summoning woven shadows to heal ridiculous amounts of health. However, most of the time, he's simply performing his basic melee attack in combination with the Bone Cage attack. This gives the player some mental and practical downtime in which they can heal, organize their inventory, and take care of the Fuel Weaver's other attacks, as well as gather their thoughts without being mentally focused 100% of the time. The Crab King is very much a contrast to this, as every one of its attacks feels like a Fuel Weaver's signature. This boss demands your constant mental attention. You need to have your head in the game pretty much all the time to react to its arsenal of deadly attacks. Granted, there is downtime while fighting it, but that only occurs while the boss is frozen. And as I've stated before, freezing the boss being the only viable way to defeat it definitely feels artificial, and also like you're cheesing the boss to death instead of defeating it honorably. Additionally, the Crab King also needs each attack to be avoidable through means other than freezing it. For example, as of now it is actually possible to avoid the geyser attack by rowing away from it, although this is not usually very fruitful, as it's very difficult to get out of the way in time, especially so if you have a Dwarf Star set up, as this will either mess up your positioning or set your boat on fire. If the geyser attack had a much longer wind up that persisted over multiple other attacks, and maybe spawn the geysers clumped closer together, as it would encourage players to maneuver their boats instead of just cancelling the attack with a freeze. The boss's freeze attack is definitely the biggest offender here, and can very easily one-shot you due to refreezing, if you aren't protected by a Dwarf Star. The attack's absurd strength is only magnified by the fact that the boss doesn't have any basic attacks that directly hit the player and cancel the freeze effect. Look at other bosses that have freeze, such as Deerclop or Klaus. Both of them will end up cancelling the freeze effect by hitting the player with basic attacks. Sure, this does give them a free hit or two towards the player, but those bosses' freeze attacks are always avoidable, unlike Mr. Krabs's. I honestly don't even know how this attack made it into the fight full stop. Did the devs even test this boss at all? It feels like they just designed and programmed a bunch of attacks, went, "Yep, this'll probably work," and then added them to the game. Giving the Crab King a basic attack, such as pinching the player with his claws, will solve the issue of infinite ice stuns, as well as breaking up the pacing of the fight with more downtime, as I discussed before. It'll also add more depth to the fight, as the player will have to kite basic attacks and manage the Crab King's more advanced moves. Overall, if the fight is balanced this way, it'll be much less of a hair-pulling experience, due to the less frequent heavy attacks. The gem balancing is a little off as well, which does go against what makes the boss unique, that being encouraging creativity and unique builds. When the boss first came out, blue gems were the go-to spam gem to fill up his empty slots, and it was clear that something needed changing. But instead of trying to balance the gems, Clay decided to make blue gems ridiculously overpowered, as not only do they buff the already ridiculous freeze attack, they also give the boss resistance to the only real way to cancel its attacks. At this point, I'm honestly waiting for purple gems to get some sort of ridiculous buff as well, which won't really help in making the boss any better. For the gems to be properly balanced, the fight needs proper testing with many different gem combinations, in order to make strategies other than freezing valid. One last thing is also that locating the boss is 100% RNG. It's very, very boring to just sail around for hours on end. Having a luck-based find in the ocean is very reminiscent of, well, Shipwrecked as a whole, but specifically the volcano. Despite being a gigantic rock formation, the volcano was notoriously difficult to find in the Shipwreck DLC, and still is to a degree, except that Clay added a way to locate it. On the new moon, rainbow jellyfish will slowly migrate towards the volcano and gather at its base. This provides a fairly reliable way to locate it, or at least to get a solid pointer towards where it'll be. The Crab King needs a system like this. Maybe not something as well hidden as the jellyfish migration, but just some way to find it. Pearl has one, through messages in bottles, and the Lunar Island sort of has one, as it usually appears when there's a large gap in the world generation, or directly opposing completely straight coasts. One possible way is for Pearl's Pearl to show the Crab King's location on the map, or at least give some sort of hint towards his location. Anyway, like I've said before, the Crab King genuinely does have potential. The mechanics are very unique, and if executed well, he could very well rise from my least favourite boss to one of my favourites. It's pretty sad to see such a cool base level concept be so poorly executed, so hopefully Clay does take action and change him for the better. Anyway, thanks for watching. As per usual, especially with videos like these, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on what I've said in the comment section. It'd be great to hear other ideas on what to change in making the Crab King boss truly great. I always read every comment, especially on videos like this, because it's always great to get a second opinion and hear what you guys have to say. But yeah, that just about does it for today's video, so wash those filthy paws of yours, stay safe, and I guess I'll see you next time.